Welcome to another episode of Conscious Business Connections, brought to you by the New York City chapter of Conscious Capitalism. My name is Bob Caporale, and I'm joined today by Mallory Combemale of the Inheritance Project located here in Brooklyn, New York. Mallory, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet. It's great to have you. I started off by saying here in Brooklyn, New York, like I'm in Brooklyn, New York, but I mean here in the area of. But that's so awesome. So, Mallory, I know we have a lot to talk about today, and as conscious capitalism is all about trying to inspire companies to practice conscious business practices. And capitalism could be a good thing for the world if businesses practice it in a conscious way. And there's four different areas that businesses can focus on, from purpose to culture to stakeholders. And we try and focus on one or all of those areas in this show to try and inspire other companies to practice these same types of things. So with that said, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Inheritance Project, kind of how you got started and what it's all about?
Sure. And since we are the Inheritance Project, we actually always like to start with sharing a little bit about our personal inheritance.
Oh,
So
awesome.
I'd start there. And when I say inheritance, what I mean is not just material objects or stuff that you receive in a will. It is everything that you inherit from past generations that makes you who you are. So that includes your culture, your values, your beliefs, your stories about yourself and the world, the way you see things,
Mm.
and everything in your life that shaped all of those lenses. So, a bit about my inheritance. I was actually born in Singapore. My mom is Chinese Singaporean, and my father is French American. He grew up in Manhattan,
Mm.
but I was raised mostly in Northwest London. So, I grew up
Wow.
in a really diverse area, in a
Mhm.
really diverse family. And from a young age, was exposed to a lot of different cultures. Where I went to high school, it was predominantly South Asian, with a lot of Jewish and Middle Eastern population as well. And I really took it for granted, the fact that everyone has a completely different way of seeing the world, different cultural traditions, and that can be a cause for a huge amount of celebration. And also, that can be a cause for a lot of conflict, which I don't think my parents will mind me saying this. I definitely experienced in my own home, seeing that a lot of the arguments and conflicts between my parents were often the source was from cultural differences. They were looking at
Mm.
the world from completely different lenses based on their life experience and perspective and culture. And so from a young age, I got really interested in this idea of cross cultural communication and exchange. And what does it take to bring people together who come from such different ways of seeing the world to collaborate? And this was kind of in my head, and I ended up getting a scholarship to go to college in Virginia. And this is where a lot of my ideas about conscious capitalism, social entrepreneurship, as well as my understanding of institutional racism and a lot of the social and economic issues that we have in the US were formed.
Mhm.
And I got really involved in this organization called Sustained Dialogue while I was there. And Sustained Dialogue is an amazing organization that uses the principles of peace negotiation to help communities come together and collaborate to solve challenges.
Mm.
And their principle, based on literally having peace treaty negotiations where two parties were literally at war. How do you get those two sides who are obviously coming from very different perspectives to come to the table and actually collaborate and find a solution? Um, the number one first step is to get them to a place of empathy where they understand and humanize the other side and see where they're coming from. So facilitating that whole process is based on that by telling our individual stories and forming human connection, this is the first step to having people collaborate effectively,
Right.
which is what we really need to solve a lot of the problems that we have in this country, in our businesses, in our teams, and no matter where we are, people need to come together to find solutions to challenges, especially right now. So,
Especially right now. Well, yeah, I'm going to pause you for a second because that resonates so much with me. We'll pick that back up, but that whole idea, like, I think of bringing people together rather than dividing them, right? I mean, so many times, especially in today's environment, we see people, I think trying to rally behind good causes, or they think they're doing the right thing, but the way that they're going about it is by dividing people, right? And to me, that just doesn't work. It never works. It just makes it worse. So this idea of kind of approaching it from a peace treaty standpoint, bringing people together to understand each other's opinions and surround themselves with empathy, to me, that's just, it just seems so obvious. I just wish that more people would practice it, right?
yeah, it sounds obvious, but it can be really challenging when those ingrained, hurts and um, suffering are so deeply ingrained. For people who've been in cultures or countries that have longstanding conflict or genocide, it can take a lot to be open and willing to come to the table to even listen to the other side.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it sounds lovely, but actually the work of doing that is really, really hard.
yeah.
And the same thing in our culture with all the issues that we're facing around race. I mean, the history is so deep and the trauma for a lot of people is so intense that we're not necessarily ready to come into those spaces all the time.
Mm.
So I do think there is a place um, for communities to process and integrate and work on some of those things within their own group. So having dialogues and conversations for white folks and then for African American folks, sometimes as a first step is really, really helpful because they're environments where people feel safe and can work on healing a lot of those um, issues, coming to terms with their own feelings and emotions in a way that doesn't impose on other people, and then get to a point where they're ready to come into that kind of dialogue. So
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
it definitely depends on a lot on where people individually are in a community,
Yep.
and um, and the phase that they're in their collective healing process.
Yeah, got it. Well, good. So I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to address that because I thought that was really an interesting thought process. But go ahead, pick us back up there, how you got to the Inheritance Project.
Sure. So, following the wandering journey of my life, I started working in strategy consulting at Deloitte, and then spent most of the first part of my career on this team called The Greenhouse, where we facilitated creative problem solving sessions for executives, which was an amazing place to work. And I learned so much and saw every different type of team from every different type of organization and industry. And I really found a lot of the same truths to be true in that environment too, that in order for people to come together and solve a problem, before we even get into ideation and brainstorming and all the tools you can use to help a group be more creative, if that foundation of understanding each other's perspective isn't there, then there's going to be breakdowns in the communication, in the solution, in the execution of the plan further along the line.
Yep.
And so I got a lot more experience with facilitation. And at the beginning of this year, I joined forces with Katya Stepanov, who's an incredible facilitator, actor. She's also immersive theater creator. And we brought together all of our expertise in facilitation, experience design. What does it really take to invite people into a space where they feel comfortable sharing their stories and connecting with one another to create the Inheritance Project,
Mm.
where we facilitate inclusion and cultural programming for organizations. And then also, we're right now working on translating our method to courses that the public can take too,
Oh,
because
that's awesome.
ultimately we want this kind of dialogue and connection to be available to everyone, no matter where they work or where they are.
That's really cool. Now, I think your backstory is important for this next question, but I work with a lot of corporations as well in a different area. I'm strategy consulting and things of that nature. But I say different, but there's definitely overlap, right? I mean, this is a big part of a lot of company strategies. But all of that to say, diversity and inclusion is obviously top of mind in a lot of bigger organizations. I see many companies ranging in how they embrace it, right? Some are checking the box, some are really, really going all in, and some are trying to go in all in, but really don't know exactly what all of that means. Um, so how does the Inheritance Project kind of differ, or maybe it's the same, but how do you approach this topic differently than some of the other companies that are out there? Because there are many people that are doing this now, right?
Yeah, and I'm grateful that finally this topic of diversity and equity and inclusion in the corporate world is getting the amount of attention and energy that it deserves after many people have been trying to campaign for this for a long time. And yes, you're right, there's a range of companies who are truly committed to creating more equitable workplace, and companies who just pay lip service to it because they need to for marketing reasons. But I think for really advancing diversity, equity, inclusion in a company, there are so many different prongs and lenses in which to look at, from the diversity of your workforce, your hiring practices, that how equitable is your pay, so many lenses. And for those kinds of questions, that is outside of the purview of what we do at Inheritance Project. We have an amazing network of DEI consultants that we can refer people to and collaborate with, but what we really focus on is building culture and working on creating inclusive cultures. And all of these different components of DEI are needed. And for a company to really advance this agenda, you need to be working on all these different aspects. But why we focus on culture and not policies or strategies is because businesses are made of people, and every individual human has a story. And so many studies show that whether an employee feels like they belong is really up to their direct relationship with their manager or leader. It
Mm.
always comes from leadership and the capacity for leaders to know how to create an inclusive environment, especially for team members who might come from really different backgrounds to them. And we are just not taught these skills in our society or education, how to communicate. And especially now with everything that's going on, even the whole topic of identity and culture is so charged that people are so uncomfortable even talking about or bringing up personal questions at work or asking people about their culture because we're so afraid to say the wrong thing. And that actually creates more divides and more feeling of alienation in workplaces. And
Yeah.
so what we do in our programs is set up a very intentional structure so that people are invited in to have those conversations with specific guidelines, with specific behaviors, so they learn and experience what it is to have a conversation about identity and inheritance that actually feels cathartic and connective rather than divisive. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable. Actually, our number one principle is embrace discomfort,
Yeah.
because these topics are challenging and emotional. And we've been taught for so long to keep the personal and the emotional out of the workplace. And I think in the last 10, 15 years or so, there's been a big shift to this idea of bringing your full self to work and being authentic in the workplace and vulnerable, and all the research that Brene Brown and others have been doing on how important that is to create trust
Yeah.
between leaders and organizations. And so this idea is still relatively new in the collective business consciousness, and people want to do that but don't have the actual skills or experiences to put that into action.
But
So
one
that's what
one thing that I do love is that it seems like we're almost being thrust into this, right? Like the whole bringing yourself to work, because now we're all virtual. And one of the things that I'm noticing, because I do a lot of workshops online, and that's mostly with groups of corporate people. And now they're all kind of in their personal space. They're wearing hats, they're wearing their casual clothes, their kids are running in and out, their dogs and cats are coming in. And what's interesting about that is those same things 10 years ago would have been like, whoa, what's going on? But now people are, they're saying hello to each other's kids when they come into the screen and stuff like that. So I really love that part of it. And it's almost like this format lends itself to that more. Do you think that's true, by the way?
That's really interesting observation. Yeah, I think there has been a huge dissolution of boundaries between the personal and the professional because of the pandemic. And I also think that this huge unexpected shock to our society and our economic system that has forced us to confront, our health, life and death, so many really deep human topics, has also caused a big shift in people's mindset and just given the opening that the way that we always did things it is not working anymore for a lot of
Right.
reasons. And
Right.
so people had to step into really quickly creative problem solving. Okay, how do we take our whole company virtual in a week?
Yeah.
And realizing that you can actually rally together and make really big changes to the way that you do things. And so I think a lot of these older inherited beliefs of this is professional, this is not, this is the way things are done, this is not. I think on an even broader perspective, a lot of those things are dissolving more and more because we're in a space of so much uncertainty
Yeah.
and
Because,
people
and yeah, none of this really mattered to the work output, right? It was all just kind of these I don't know, preconceived notions that we placed on ourselves. But another thing that really strikes me about what you were saying, and I love this idea as well, of working on culture and bringing people together and building their understanding. I almost feel like that has to happen before the policy discussions, right? Because I see so many people being thrust into these policy meetings, and they almost feel like it's forced on them, and a lot of them come in with these barriers very, very strongly built up, saying this is ridiculous, I'm just going in here because they're making me. But they don't understand why it's happening, and in some cases, frankly, it's probably not being approached in a way that would make them understand why it's happening. And so it sounds like, kind of bringing people together around culture, cultural differences, understanding, should almost be a prerequisite before the policy training, right? It feels like that to me anyway.
yes, you're 100% absolutely right. And we we yeah, we say that this work is foundational, that if you don't first understand who you are, if you don't first understand your own inheritance, what your identity is and what you're bringing to the table, then how can you even have a conversation about advancing DEI in your organization? Like, our the way we approach things is first inviting every individual to explore their own identity and feel totally comfortable with who they are, the
Yeah.
color of their skin, their culture, their background, and and then feel comfortable sharing that with others and listening to people who have totally different experiences to them and really practicing the skill of deep listening.
Yeah.
And so those two things, self-awareness and deep listening, are foundational, and no policy conversation is going to be effective if you don't have those foundational aspects in place in your culture.
Another thing that I love about what you're doing is you're not grouping people so broadly. It doesn't sound like, anyway. Like, I'm sure anybody looking at me, including myself, I would identify as a white male, right? But I'm very, very different from an upbringing, from a background, from a cultural perspective than many, many other white males, right? I mean, but to be grouped all together and assume, well, they're all the same, that to me is it's I'm not going to say it's not fair. I don't know what I would call it, but it's not correct. It's not accurate, right? Because I have a very unique and different upbringing than many other people who may look exactly like me, right? So do you kind of cover that in the training as well?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing this up. Every individual has a unique inheritance. And yes, your inheritance includes your skin color and so much more than that. All the cultural upbringing, your class, your creed or religion, the countries your ancestors came from, so much more, and your specific family circumstances. And to group everyone together based on skin color is actually erasing people's stories and identities. And
Yeah.
an inquiry that we like to invite people into is when you feel like when you feel the need to simplify your identity or the identity of someone else, who is that really serving? Because
Yeah.
actually putting people into these boxes, in this kind of way, is it really advancing the agenda that we want, which is having an equitable society where
Yeah.
every individual's unique gifts are celebrated?
Yeah, and I would think you could say that of any culture, any skin color, right? Black, white, whatever you say, that there's all different types of inheritance that comes with that, right? So to group people that broadly, to me, seems like a miss, right? It just seems like a miss. So if you were going to, kind of give advice to a company or, large or small, how they can embrace some of these principles, besides kind of calling you, which would be great, but what do you think that they could do to kind of start some of these conversations and start embracing some of the things that you're talking about?
Hmm. Definitely call us.
Yeah, well, that's one, right?
uh, and and then I would say it starts from the top. Leadership, everything starts with leadership. So if you're a leader in an organization and you don't feel comfortable about these topics, you don't feel comfortable about your inheritance or your identity or your own story, and or feel comfortable having these conversations, then it's probably not a good idea to start facilitating these conversations. Because
Mm,
what I see a lot in companies is that, especially this summer, such a rush to try and take action and show that we care and are doing something, that actually sometimes those actions or those conversations that have been started end up doing more harm than good
mm,
because they're not approached in the right way.
yeah.
And so I would say, before you rush into doing anything, slow down and think about who you are, what's really your intention doing this kind of work, what's really your vision for your organization, what's really driving this desire. And one tool you can use is, on our website, we have a free online workbook, which is a 30-minute self-reflection exercise where you can reflect on and integrate and process different questions about your own identity and inheritance. And this is a really good starting point, because once you as a leader have this understanding and self-awareness and confidence about who you are and your identity, then it's so much easier to start a conversation and invite other people to the table. So for me, my advice would be, it's a lot less about what specific actions you take, because there are so many. You could do roundtables, conversations, you change your policies in so many ways, and they're all great things. But if it doesn't come from the right starting point of leadership's intention and authenticity, then no matter what the initiative is, it's not going to be effective.
It's such incredibly great advice, because I see this all the time, and employees can see through that, right? They know when their companies are just trying to check a box because they have to for PR purposes or whatever else. But when a leader truly embraces it, and I think approaches it from a standpoint of what they really want to accomplish, right? Which may not be what they're told from the outside, right? Not everyone's going to agree on everything, but really comes from a genuine place, that feels like just such a great starting point. And I know this can be such an uncomfortable conversation. I mean, me also, whenever this comes up on the show, and obviously this does come up, I always get kind of tense. Like, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I saying, I don't want to come off the wrong way, whatever else. But then I just started to feel like, when you're just talking about it genuinely, even if you don't understand something correctly, someone could educate you, right? But I think just being more open and honest and authentic about this whole topic is going to get us a lot further than being negative or divisive or just trying to check boxes. I mean, that's just kind of the way that I would look at it. So Mallory, this has been really just an incredible conversation. I want to make sure that we don't leave the show without you giving people a chance exactly where to find some of those resources and learn more about your company. So tell us where we can go and get some of that stuff.
Awesome. Yes, you can find us at inheritanceproject.org, and there you can find our online workbook, which anyone in the public can take. It's a really amazing resource. It will also have any upcoming public events that we do occasionally, as well as more details about the programs that we offer for organizations. And something I will share is that we just launched a really exciting new offering, which is called Deep Dining,
Hmm.
which is an alternative to your holiday party in a virtual space, a cultural program to help your team come together and start building these kinds of human connections through storytelling about their culture using the avenue of food, which we're really excited about because no matter where you come from, food is always that connective tissue that brings people together.
It
It's
is.
also a really safe or a more comfortable entry point into having these kind of conversations. And it's a time when so many teams are struggling to maintain their culture and the trust after working virtually for so long that is really required to be effective. And so, yeah, if you're looking for holiday programming, this is a great option, in addition to a lot of our more intensive, inclusive leadership trainings.
Such a great idea. Well, Mallory, best of luck with everything. I think it's going to be such a cool project and so great. So thank you so much for joining us. And we want to make sure we thank our listeners, viewers, whatever we want to call them. If you like the show, please subscribe. Please tell your friends. We want to try and spread the word about conscious capitalism and how you could adopt it in your business, especially in the greater New York City area. So please help us to do that. We also don't want to leave without thanking the sponsors of our chapter, the Tomiak Foundation and the Core Club. Without their support, programs like this would not be possible. So, Mallory, thank you again, and we'll hopefully be in touch. And for everyone else, we'll see you back here on another episode of Conscious Business Connections. Thanks for joining.